You've shared an incredible stack of material with us today, and I got to say the mission for our deep dive is genuinely thrilling.
It really is.
We are looking at a text that takes some of the most, beloved contemporary romance tropes and basically uses them as a Trojan horse.
A total Trojan horse.
Yeah, to smuggle in this razor-sharp critique of institutional power. We're exploring the intersection of raw ambition, toxic workplace culture, and honestly, an absolutely sizzling romance in Falon Ballard's novel, Toe-to-Toe.
It's quite the ride.
And specifically, we are looking at the Toe-to-Toe Kindle Falon Ballard release, which is crucial because you provided us with all that fascinating front matter.
Right. The front matter is key here.
We've got the dedications, a remarkably poignant author's note, the critical praise from her previous releases, and of course, substantial, highly detailed excerpts from the novel itself, detailing the journey of our two protagonists, Allegra and Cord.
It is an incredibly rich text to unpack, and framing it as a Trojan horse is it's the perfect way to start, because when you look at the supplementary material you provided, specifically the critical pedigree of the author, you see a very distinct pattern.
Oh, for sure.
Critics have consistently praised Ballard's previous works, books like Change of Heart, All I Want Is You, Right on Cue,
Just My Time,
and Lease on Love. And the reviews are just littered with phrases like chemistry-filled banter, badass feminist rom-coms, and they frequently crown her the queen of sexual tension.
which is a great title to have.
Right. There is an established expectation when a reader picks up a Falon Ballard book. They expect the dopamine hit of a perfectly executed romance.
Which is why Elle magazine called her work a sparkler with much-needed acidity. And Publishers Weekly highlights her fast-paced, addictive contemporaries. Reviewers constantly point out her ability to write stories that are somehow simultaneously heart-wrenching and cozy.
Yeah, that's her signature.
And Toe-to-Toe follows this exact blueprint. It delivers on the promise of the genre. I mean, it has the grumpy sunshine dynamics, the forced proximity, the delicious hidden identities. But rather than just relying on those tropes for, lighthearted escapism, Ballard anchors the entire narrative to a layered, intensely emotional exploration of the grueling, often incredibly dark world of professional ballet.
Which brings us directly to that author's note at the very beginning of the Kindle edition.
Yes.
It is arguably one of the most important pieces of text in the entire book, and it arrives before the narrative even begins. Ballard is setting a very clear, very deliberate boundary with her reader.
She warns the audience right up front.
Exactly. She warns about themes of workplace sexual harassment, mentions of past sexual assault, and the hyper-awareness of eating habits and body image within professional ballet.
Which is heavy stuff for a rom-com.
It is. But by placing that at the forefront, she grounds the conversation. She is telling you, the reader, that while you are going to get the swoony romantic beats you signed up for, you're also going to be taking a hard, critical look at institutional toxicity. It demands that we treat the setting not just as a glamorous backdrop, but as a deeply flawed ecosystem.
And that framing completely changes how we approach the character and world building in the opening chapters. Let's look at Allegra Hart. We're introduced to her world through this striking, immediately memorable internal monologue.
The mirror scene.
Yes. She's looking in the mirror at her dance studio, and she thinks, if my life were a color, it would be ballet pink. And I think I might hate pink.
It is a profound introduction to a character's internal state. If we pause and connect this to the bigger picture of her life, Allegra is a 27-year-old soloist at Ballet New York, which the text refers to as BNY.
Right.
Now, in almost any other profession, 27 is the beginning of your career. You're young, you're finding your footing. In the ballet world, as Allegra herself acutely notes, 27 is practically ancient.
You are fighting the clock every single day.
Exactly. She has been molded physically, psychologically, emotionally by this institution since she was 3 years old. So that opening quote about hating ballet pink isn't just a quirky observation about her wardrobe.
It's so much darker than that.
It is a startling, terrifying moment of self-awareness. It's the realization that her entire identity, down to the color palette of her existence, has been subsumed by her profession. She notes that her reflection reeks of it. The pink tights, the pink leotard, the pink pointed shoes. It is an aesthetic prison that she doesn't know how to escape, even as she desperately wants to succeed within it.
That sense of being trapped is so palpable in the text. She talks about the bar exercises, how every dancer in the room moves with the exact same fluidity, hitting the exact same position on the exact same beat.
Conformity is the goal.
Right. The entire goal of classical ballet training, especially in the corps de ballet, is blending in. It is about becoming one singular entity and completely erasing your individuality. And that erasure makes her current conflict so incredibly stressful. She's a soloist trying to make principal dancer.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
For those who might not know the intricate hierarchy of a ballet company, making principal is the absolute pinnacle. It's the rarest air. You go from being part of the scenery to being the undisputed star. But standing between her and that lifelong goal is her artistic director, David. And David is, well, he is a walking case study in coercive control.
David is the human embodiment of the toxic institution Ballard warned us about in the author's note. He holds all the power, and he wields it with terrifying subtlety. The text shows him dangling this principal promotion over Allegra's head like a carrot.
Yeah, it's so manipulative.
He announces to the company that he is creating a new, original ballet, and he specifically states that this piece will require a different set of skills. He wants sex appeal. He wants boundary-pushing rawness. But it's how he delivers this message that is so insidious.
The eye contact.
The eye contact. During this announcement, he makes very pointed, lingering eye contact with Allegra. He heavily implies in front of her peers that she lacks this specific edge. And he does this while simultaneously crossing physical and professional boundaries in the studio space.
He literally tells the entire company he wants to see who is willing to go the distance. That specific phrasing, willing to go the distance, what is he actually demanding of her in that moment? Because it feels like a massive professional trap.
It is a trap. He is essentially weaponizing her ambition against her. By saying he wants to see who will go the distance, he's blurring the line between artistic dedication and personal submission. He knows what she can do technically. Her technique is flawless. What he's really asking is how much she is willing to perform for him personally to secure this role. It's a classic grooming technique within power imbalances.
Right, because she can't say no.
Exactly. He is establishing a scenario where the only way to succeed professionally is to accept his inappropriate physical lingering and his psychological manipulation. He creates an environment where asserting a boundary means forfeiting your career.
Which puts Allegra in a state of sheer desperation. She knows the mechanics of classical ballet inside and out. She has perfected the rigid, ethereal, almost untouchable grace that the form demands. But she has no idea how to be sexy on stage because the institution of ballet has spent 24 years entirely desexualizing her body for the sake of the art. Her body has been a tool for creating geometric lines, not a vessel for personal sensual expression. She realizes she needs outside help. She needs a crash course in reclaiming her own physicality. And that desperate need is what brings her to Cord Donovan.
And Cord's world provides the perfect thematic and structural contrast to Allegra's. If Allegra's world is rigid, hierarchical, and steeped in classical tradition, Cord's world is entirely self-made and unapologetically modern. Cord is 33, and he is the creator, director, and choreographer of a show called Six Packed.
Which gives us one of the funniest moments in the provided excerpts. Allegra tracks him down to his rehearsal space, and she asks the guy at the front desk to point her toward the tap dancer.
I love that part.
The desk worker is completely baffled, because Six Packed is not a quaint tap dancing revue. It is a highly lucrative, insanely popular, wildly sensual male revue show. It's essentially a high-end, intensely choreographed Magic Mike spectacular.
The humor of that misunderstanding is great, but the underlying contrast is vital for understanding the thematic core of the novel. Look at the economic and social power dynamics at play. Allegra, despite dedicating her entire life to a prestigious high art institution, is rigidly controlled and, frankly, poorly paid.
Yeah, the pay discrepancy is huge.
The text highlights Cord, noting that corps dancers and soloists make very little money considering the physical destruction they endure. She is entirely submissive to the ballet hierarchy. Cord, on the other hand, operates in a space that the high art world would consider lowbrow or purely commercial. Yet he has achieved total financial independence and complete creative freedom.
He's his own boss.
He built his empire from the ground up. He answers to no one. Furthermore, he is deeply protective of his dancers, like his dance captain Noah. He runs his rehearsals with a strict my show, my rules mentality, but unlike David's rules, Cord's are built on a foundation of mutual respect and explicit consent rather than fear and coercion.
That contrast makes their initial meeting, their meet-cute, so charged. Allegra seeks him out after actually watching his show, which completely flusters her and short-circuits her classical sensibilities, by the way.
She was not prepared for that show.
Not at all. She corners him and pitches this business proposition.
Yeah.
She essentially says, I need you to teach me how to be sexy on stage so I can win this principal role at BNY. And Cord's immediate reaction subverts the usual romance trope where the male lead is instantly eager to help the damsel. Cord is totally resistant. He takes one look at her pink aesthetic and immediately dubs her slippers.
Slippers is a fantastic detail. It's dismissive, yes, but it also shows how quickly he reads her. He recognizes the ballet world archetype she represents. When she reveals that she dances specifically for Ballet New York, the text gives us access to Cord's internal monologue, and it is incredibly revealing.
He hates that world.
He feels a deep, familiar ire burning in his chest. He doesn't know David personally, but he knows the architect. He scrubs his hand over his face and thinks, what a fucking prick. Directors of ballet companies usually are. He actively tries to reject her proposition. He warns her that it's a terrible idea.
But she doesn't back down. She offers to pay him, and he completely brushes that off because he has his own wealth. But then the dynamic shifts. He looks at her face, and he sees this raw, unadulterated desperation in her gaze. And that is what stops him. Why does her desperation work when money doesn't?
Because he recognizes it. He recognizes the specific, hollow desperation of an artist who has given everything to an institution and is terrified of walking away empty-handed. It captivates him because it mirrors something deep within his own past. He asks her a very simple, cutting question. What happens if you never make principal?
And her answer is devastating.
Devastating in its brevity. She says, I don't know. She literally cannot conceptualize an identity or a future outside of this singular goal. That lack of an alternative identity is a trauma response to the institutional conditioning she's endured. So, despite his immense hatred for her world, his empathy overrides his resistance. He agrees to help her.
That agreement launches them into a deeply fascinating psychological space. Because teaching her isn't just about showing her new choreography. It requires her to systematically unlearn a quarter-century of deeply ingrained physical and mental habits. Which brings us to the mechanics of these lessons, and specifically, that phenomenal first encounter in his studio.
The first lesson perfectly encapsulates the friction between their two realities. And it requires us to really examine what mastery of an art form actually looks like when you strip away the pomp and circumstance.
She shows up to his pristine modern studio wearing Ugg boots and these adorable, deeply unballerina socks covered in cartoon pizza slices.
The pizza socks.
She assumes they're just going to sit down and have a theoretical conversation about sex appeal. And Cord is completely, utterly baffled by this. He looks at her and says, you mean to tell me a trained dancer came to a dance class without proper footwear? And then he does something terrifying for a classical dancer.
He makes her strip away the armor.
He forces her to take off the Uggs, take off the pizza socks, and dance barefoot. For someone who has spent her entire life encased in the rigid armor of pointed shoes, being asked to freestyle with her bare feet on the floor is akin to asking a knight to go into battle without a sword.
It is a brilliant pedagogical move on Cord's part. True mastery of a skill often requires stripping away the specialized tools we use as crutches to reconnect with the fundamentals of human movement. When she starts to dance, Cord's assessment of her is entirely analytical, yet deeply empathetic.
He sees right through the technique.
He watches her move, and he immediately realizes that her technical skill is flawless. She has the balance, the extension, the strength to be a prima ballerina. That isn't what David is criticizing. What she is entirely missing is internal confidence. She moves like a technician, not an artist. Cord explicitly notes in the text that ballet has a tendency to beat the confidence right out of you.
That's such a heavy observation.
He is diagnosing a systemic issue within institutionalized art forms. Highly rigid, classical institutions often prioritize technical perfection to such an extreme, punishing degree that they entirely hollow out the emotional resonance of the performer. They want a machine, not a human.
That diagnosis leads to one of the most striking visual moments in the source material. He stops her dancing, he walks up to her, reaches out a single finger, and taps the absolute center of her forehead. He says, "You dance here." He is identifying her hyper-intellectualization of the movement. She is counting beats, checking angles, calculating her turnout.
Living entirely in her head.
Then he moves his finger down, stopping level with her heart, very carefully making sure not to actually touch her chest, and says, "You need to dance from here."
That physical distinction between the head and the heart is everything. He follows it up by asking her a question that completely throws her off balance. He asks if she's actually having any fun. He points out a fundamental truth of performance. How can you possibly entertain, captivate, or seduce an audience if you aren't experiencing any joy or passion yourself?
An audience feels what the performer feels.
Exactly. Allegra's response is incredibly telling of her conditioning. She says, completely deadpan, ballet isn't supposed to be fun. She has entirely internalized suffering, discipline, and pain as the necessary, unavoidable components of high art.
So how does he break through that conditioning? How do you teach someone to feel joy in their body when their body has been a site of rigorous discipline for 24 years? It requires an immense foundational level of trust. And this is where Cord subverts every toxic male authority figure Allegra has ever encountered. He builds this trust through explicit, almost radical communication about physical boundaries. Before they get into the heavy partnering work, he stops and establishes a safe word.
The implementation of the safe word is a masterclass in establishing psychological safety. The word is umbrella. He looks at her and says, I'm going to touch you again during our lesson. Do you remember your word? Now, Allegra's reaction is deeply concerning, but entirely realistic for her environment.
She doesn't even get why he's asking.
She is almost confused by his respect. She brushes it off, saying she's been dancing since she was 3. Male partners and directors are always putting their hands on her. She's used to being manhandled for the sake of the choreography. She essentially tells him he doesn't need to warm her, but Cord does not accept that normalization of boundary crossing. His response is vital. He says, in my studio, people ask before touching other people's bodies.
That line is so powerful. He introduces a framework of active consent that entirely dismantles the patriarchal coercive structure Allegra has been subjected to at BNY. It creates this glaring, impossible-to-ignore contrast with David. David's non-consensual lingering hands, his inappropriate eye contact, his implied threats, all of that is just an accepted atmospheric reality of Allegra's daily workplace.
It's just the water she swims in.
Exactly. She doesn't even question it anymore. Cord is stepping in and saying, no, your body is your own, and you have the final say over who touches it and how. He is showing her what a healthy, respectful, artistic partnership actually looks like.
And the narrative proves that psychological safety is the prerequisite for true artistic vulnerability. Once that trust is established, once Allegra realizes she is truly safe with him, the chemistry and the emotional barriers just explode. The text gives us these incredible set pieces where Cord takes her out of the sterile studio environment to apply these lessons in the real world.
Yes, the salsa club scene. This is such a fantastic moment. Cord takes her to a crowded, vibrant salsa club to teach her how to loosen her hips. He doesn't give her complex choreography. He breaks it down to the most basic, grounding rhythm. Out, step in.
Back to basics.
He wants her to stop treating her body like a rigid, tightly wound tool, meant only for straight lines and pointed toes. He pulls her onto the dance floor amidst the heat and the noise, and suddenly she isn't dancing to stand out. She isn't dancing to be graded or judged or to hit a perfect technical metric. She's dancing to connect. She's just feeling the music rather than counting it.
Ballard also introduces Cord's twin sister, Chloe, to aid in this unlearning process. Chloe is brought in to teach Allegra pole dancing, and the juxtaposition of classical ballet and pole dancing is incredibly rich. The advice Chloe gives Allegra is deeply poignant. Chloe points out that the sheer physical mechanics of pole dancing, the core strength, the lifting, the holding of body weight are actually quite easy for a highly trained ballerina.
She already has the muscles.
Allegra has the muscles for it. But the real challenge, Chloe explains, is in selling it. It's the hair toss, the eye contact, the finding of joy in the movement, the owning of one's own sensuality. Chloe is teaching her that reclaiming the body for pleasure and self-expression is a profoundly different skill set than using the body for discipline and punishment.
Which brings up such an interesting, universally applicable question for you listening right now. Regardless of whether you are a dancer, an accountant, a software engineer, or a teacher, think about your own life and your own career trajectory. Have you ever been so technically proficient at your job, so entirely focused on climbing the ladder, hitting the metrics, or achieving the promotion, that you completely forgot how to actually enjoy the work?
It happens so often.
Have you ever lost the why behind what you do? Because unlearning a lifetime of rigid, goal-oriented habits is incredibly difficult. Allegra struggles with this deeply. She has a moment of profound vulnerability, where she admits to Cord that she has spent an entire lifetime treating her body like it exists purely for ballet's sake. And she confesses that she isn't even sure she wants to think differently now, because she is so terrified that changing her mindset will derail her just when she is millimeters away from her ultimate goal of becoming principal.
That resistance is completely natural. When a system has abused you, but you have finally figured out how to succeed within that system, the idea of dismantling your coping mechanisms feels like a death sentence. And to understand the true weight of that resistance, we have to look at the trauma that underpins this entire world. We have to dive into the dark side of the bar, which brings us back to the heavy themes Ballard outlined in her front matter.
Right. Throughout the early parts of the book, we know Cord hates ballet. He makes no secret of it. He calls Swan Lake boring. He rolls his eyes at classical music. He refers to directors as pricks. It's easy to write it off as just a quirky character trait, the modern commercial dancer who disdains high art.
Just some artistic rivalry.
Exactly. But when he finally sits down with Allegra on a bench outside her mother's house and tells her the unvarnished truth about his past, realize his hatred has absolutely nothing to do with the art form itself. It is rooted in a deep, unresolved, catastrophic institutional trauma.
The reveal of Cord and Chloe's backstory is devastating, and it serves as the emotional fulcrum of the entire novel. We learn that Cord and his twin sister, Chloe, were both immensely talented dancers at the Pacific Ballet. They had trained together their entire lives. It was their shared dream. But the dream turned into a nightmare when a prominent, highly celebrated choreographer at the company assaulted Chloe.
And this wasn't a gray area.
No, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a violation. And when Chloe summoned the immense, terrifying courage to come forward and report the assault to the leadership, we see the exact mechanics of how elite institutions protect themselves.
They protected the abuser.
Yeah.
They actively shielded him. They didn't believe her, or perhaps more accurately, they didn't care if it was true. The choreographer was a marquee name. He brought in prestige, he brought in ticket sales, he brought in wealthy donors. To the institution, his economic and reputational value vastly outweighed the safety and humanity of a young core dancer.
Exactly. The institution performed a cold, calculated cost-benefit analysis and decided Chloe was expendable. And the tragedy compounds, because by protecting the abuser and silencing the victim, the institution enabled him to offend again. When Cord found out that his sister had been assaulted a second time, specifically because the company leadership had failed to remove the threat, he completely lost his grip on his professionalism.
Which is completely understandable.
The text details how he physically attacked the director in a rage. And the ultimate result: the institution swiftly and ruthlessly excised the problem. Both Cord and Chloe were fired. They were blacklisted from the classical ballet industry. Chloe lost her entire career, the singular passion she had dedicated her life to, entirely because the institution prioritized shielding a powerful, abusive man over the safety of its vulnerable artists.
Hearing that completely shatters your initial understanding of Cord. He isn't just a grumpy guy who prefers modern dance beats to Tchaikovsky. He is a survivor of institutional betrayal. He harbors a venomous, deep-seated hatred for the ballet establishment because it actively traumatized his sister and derailed their lives. So later, when he looks at Allegra and tells her, "I have a problem supporting an institution I know to be abusive," he isn't making a flippant remark about not liking the music. He is drawing a massive, uncrossable psychological boundary designed to protect his own mental health and honor his sister's survival.
And what makes Ballard's writing so layered is that Allegra isn't just a naive victim stumbling into this world. She carries her own deep-seated trauma tied to the ballet world, specifically an insidious generational trauma. The text explores her complicated relationship with her mother. We discover that Allegra's mother essentially forced her into ballet when she was a toddler.
Why? Because the mother couldn't cut it.
Because the mother herself was a former dancer who quit. She left the industry because she felt she wasn't good enough to make it out of the corps de ballet. She lacked the natural, transcendent talent that Allegra possesses. So, the mother projected all of her own failed ambitions, all of her unresolved grief over her own career, directly onto her young daughter. Allegra confesses to Cord that she never really had a choice in the beginning. Her mom made it explicitly clear that ballet was Allegra's thing, regardless of whether the child actually liked it or not.
That generational pressure manifests in a brutal physical way. It directly impacts Allegra's relationship with her own body. The text delves deeply into the physical toll and the intense body dysmorphia that ballet culture breeds. Allegra has a deeply ingrained hatred for her own breasts. She explicitly states she hates them because they are too big for ballet. The classical ballet aesthetic is notoriously unforgiving. It demands extreme thinness, prepubescent chests, and clean, sharp, geometric lines. Allegra is a grown woman. Her natural adult feminine body is treated by the institution and, by extension, herself as a flaw. It is a biological inconvenience that ruins the line of the art.
It's a heartbreaking internalization of an impossible standard, but this is where Cord's role in her life becomes actively healing. There is a beautifully intimate, highly charged moment in the text where he explicitly challenges and dismantles her self-hatred. When she verbally berates her own body, telling him she hates her breasts because they don't fit the mold, he immediately and forcefully shuts that narrative down. He looks at her and tells her she is fucking perfect.
He doesn't even hesitate.
He doesn't just tolerate her body. He worships the exact physical attributes that the ballet world and her mother told her were wrong and shameful. He provides a counter-narrative of unconditional physical acceptance.
And he extends that healing to her relationship with food, which is another massive trigger point in the ballet world, as noted in the author's note. There is a pivotal scene where they are at a restaurant. Cord orders an appetizer, and he notices her hesitation, her ingrained calculus of calories and aesthetic punishment. He tells her, "Athletes watch what they eat, Allegra. You don't have to eat anything you aren't comfortable with." But the framing is crucial.
Yes, the athlete framing.
He is validating her need to fuel her body for a highly demanding, intensely physical job. But he is actively removing the shame, guilt, and starvation tactics that are so often associated with diet in the ballet world. He draws a direct comparison between dancers and football players, asking a brilliant question. Why do we not offer professional dancers the same courtesy, nutritional science, and basic respect as other elite athletes? It's a grounding approach that forces Allegra to see herself not as a fragile porcelain doll meant to be starved into perfection, but as a powerful athlete who deserves sustenance.
They are profoundly healing each other. Cord is giving Allegra the safety to exist in her own body, and Allegra is showing Cord that not everyone in the classical world is complicit in its cruelty. But because this is a masterfully paced narrative, right when they reach this beautiful synthesis, the external world has to crash in and force a reckoning. This brings us to the collision of love versus ambition, the ultimatum.
As their romance blossoms and they grow intimately closer, the reality of their entirely incompatible lives finally sets in. The timeline is ticking. Allegra is days away from premiering her dream role. She successfully navigated David's twisted requirements, she applied Cord's lessons, and she got the part. She is on the absolute verge of stepping onto the stage as a principal dancer, the culmination of 24 years of sacrifice. She is vibrating with excitement, and naturally she wants the man she is falling in love with to be in the audience to witness her triumph. But Cord realizes a terrible truth. He simply cannot stomach walking into that theater. He cannot buy a ticket to support Ballet New York, and by extension, he cannot financially or emotionally support David's regime.
We get this incredibly tense, quiet, and then explosive confrontation. Allegra is practically glowing with anticipation, and Cord, avoiding her eyes and staring down at his drink, drops the anvil. He tells her, softly but firmly, "I don't go to the ballet. So while I'm sure Allegra is going to be amazing, I won't be there to see it." And that refusal sparks a massive argument. Cord essentially corners her with an ultimatum. He asks her to make a choice. Step away from the deeply toxic environment of BNY, walk away from David's overt abuse and manipulation, or lose him because he cannot stand by and watch her be subjected to that environment.
And this is where I want to pause and really look at this from both sides, because Ballard's writing is so layered that neither character is entirely right or entirely wrong. As a reader, you feel the impossible weight of this conflict. If we look at it from Cord's perspective, his stance makes complete psychological sense. He is setting a necessary, non-negotiable boundary. He is protecting his own fragile mental health. He knows exactly how toxic and dangerous men like David are. His sister's life was ruined by one. He refuses to sit in an audience and applaud, while the woman he loves submits to an abuser's coercive control just to secure a role. From his vantage point, by staying at BNY, Allegra is actively choosing to be complicit in her own abuse, and he cannot be a passive witness to that destruction.
It's a textbook trauma response. He is trying to save her in the way he couldn't save Chloe. But let's flip the lens and look at it entirely from Allegra's perspective. She is days away from achieving a lifelong dream. She has endured broken toes, bleeding feet, eating disorders, emotional manipulation, and a stolen childhood to reach this exact moment. She looks at him and says, "I am not giving up right when I'm on the cusp of being made a principal." And she is entirely justified in her anger.
Absolutely.
She refuses to allow her life's work to be derailed by a man she has known for a matter of months. She brilliantly points out the hypocrisy of his demand, stating, "I am not going to sit here and be chastised for doing something that makes me happy." She's fighting for her own agency. Cord is asking her to blow up her entire career to make him feel safe. It's an impossible lose-lose situation.
It is genuinely devastating, and it results in a brutal breakup. Cord looks at her and says, he doesn't see how they can figure this out. He declares that ballet is fundamentally toxic, and he cannot be with anyone who is still actively participating in that toxicity. He puts the weight of the fracture entirely on her shoulders, telling her, "This is the choice you're making, Allegra." And she, holding onto her hard-won agency, turns and walks away.
The emotional fallout in the subsequent chapters is incredibly grounded. We don't just skip to the reunion. We sit in the grief. The text shows Allegra going home completely heartbroken and drinking wine on her bed with her sister Bethany. She is mourning. She articulates the trap she's in. "There is no way for me to win here. Either I give up Cord and keep dancing, or I keep Cord and quit ballet." She isn't just mourning the loss of a handsome guy. She's mourning the loss of the first person in her adult life who made her feel like a complete human being, rather than just a highly tuned instrument for dance.
But the narrative doesn't let Cord off the hook, which is so refreshing. The fallout on his end is equally profound, and it is facilitated by his best friend and dance captain, Noah. Noah realizes what Cord has done, and Noah does not mince words. He confronts Cord and bluntly tells him that he is massively screwed up. Noah serves as the voice of reason, pointing out the glaring hypocrisy in Cord's actions. Noah reminds Cord that he was supposed to be the one standing by Allegra, supporting her through this incredibly stressful, vulnerable transition. Instead, the very first major hurdle, Cord panicked, projected his own trauma onto her, and forced an ultimatum.
Noah's dialogue in this scene is a masterclass in accountability. He tells Cord, "She only chose ballet because you made her choose." It's a harsh, jagged truth that pierces right through Cord's self-righteousness. Noah continues, "You know how much this part meant to her, and you expected her to what? Quit the show." Noah forces Cord to look in the mirror and realize a terrifying truth. By demanding that she quit BNY to suit his comfort level, Cord was attempting to control Allegra's choices and dictate her career path just as much as David does. The motivations were different. David is driven by malice and ego, Cord by fear and protection, but the mechanism of control was exactly the same. Cord was stripping her of her agency.
That realization is a gut punch for Cord, and it serves as the catalyst for the final act of the book. Cord doesn't just realize he's wrong and go buy flowers. He realizes he is fundamentally broken in a way that is harming the people he loves. And that brings us to the resolution. Cord finally takes accountability for his own unhealed wounds. He takes a step he should have taken years ago. He starts going to therapy.
This detail is crucial. In so many romances, love is presented as the cure for trauma. Ballard rejects that dangerous trope. Love isn't a substitute for professional psychological help. Cord meets with a therapist, Dr. Leeds, and he begins doing the grueling, necessary work to unpack his lingering trauma surrounding Chloe's assault and his subsequent banishment from the classical world. He sits in that office and finally admits that he met a woman he deeply cares for, but because she is a ballerina dealing with an abusive director, it triggered every single alarm bell from his past. He recognizes, with professional guidance, that he unfairly projected his own desperate need to escape the ballet world onto Allegra's present situation. He learns that you cannot force someone to heal on your timeline, and you cannot mandate their boundaries for them.
I love that Ballard gives us that parallel growth. While Cord is doing the quiet, internal work in a therapist's office, Allegra is doing the loud, external work under the stage lights. Opening night arrives. She is wrestling with the emotional turmoil of the breakup. Her heart is broken. But she doesn't crumble. She takes that pain, that raw, unpolished grief, and she combines it with every single lesson about embodiment and joy that Cord taught her. She steps out onto that stage, and for the first time in her life, she doesn't just execute the choreography flawlessly. She dances from her heart. She claims the space. The text describes the aftermath, with reviews pouring in, calling her performance electrifying, hypnotic, and entirely transformative. She does it. She achieves her lifelong dream. She is officially a principal dancer.
Yet the victory carries a complex emotional resonance. As she celebrates, she feels a profound absence. She wonders if she is doomed to live a half-life forever, having achieved the pinnacle of ballet, but having lost the deep human connection of love. It's a melancholy moment. But Ballard, having dragged us through the ringer, finally delivers the grand romantic gesture we've earned. After the show, the adrenaline fading, Allegra walks out the stage door of the theater. And there, stepping out from the shadows of the alley, is a familiar figure.
It's Cord. And the detail of what he's holding is so specific. He's holding a bouquet of coral sunset-colored roses. Not the standard red, but vibrant coral. He is there, and he immediately takes ownership of his mistakes. He admits he was wrong to issue the ultimatum. He tells her that he simply couldn't pass up the chance to see her dance her first leading role, regardless of his hatred for the building she was doing it in. And then he gives her the ultimate validation. He says, "Watching you up there tonight, it was clear that you were made for ballet. You were made for the stage in that role." In that moment, he finally successfully separates the undeniable toxicity of the institution from the pure, transcendent beauty of her individual talent. He sees her, not just the system she works for.
And their reconciliation is grounded in a beautiful, realistic compromise. It's not a fairy tale ending where one person entirely capitulates to the other's worldview. Allegra doesn't quit ballet. She stays at BNY, proudly holding her newly minted principal status. But she invites Cord into her world on her terms. She asks if he wants to come out with the company to celebrate her promotion. She is testing him, testing his ability to assimilate into the reality of her life without trying to burn it down. And he accepts. They find a middle ground. They figure out how to support each other's entirely different passions and careers without compromising their own fundamental boundaries.
And Ballard ties a fantastic little bow on the narrative regarding alternative paths in the dance world. Allegra's friend Lucy, who was also grinding away, miserable in the corps de ballet at BNY, takes a completely different route. Lucy quits the classical ballet world entirely and successfully auditions to join Six Pack. She becomes a permanent cast member in Cord Show, dancing alongside Noah. It's a brilliant subplot because it visually demonstrates that there isn't just one right way to be a professional artist. There are multiple paths to happiness, financial stability, and success in the arts, and leaving a prestigious institution doesn't mean you failed. It might just mean you found a healthier stage.
Synthesizing all of these narrative threads, it becomes incredibly clear why Toe to Toe is resonating so deeply with its audience. Ballard uses the highly accessible, deeply engaging framework of a steamy, trope-filled romance to explore some profoundly heavy real-world issues. She examines the true cost of ambition and what institutions demand of the people who serve them. She highlights the absolute necessity of setting personal and professional boundaries even when it terrifies you. And perhaps most importantly, she paints a very realistic, unromanticized picture of healing. She shows us that recovering from institutional trauma or unlearning toxic habits is a messy, non-linear journey that requires active, conscious work.
It's exactly. Allegra and Cord were uniquely positioned to save each other, but only after they learned to save themselves. Allegra had to learn to dance for herself, to reclaim her own body, her sexuality, and her joy, rather than just suffering silently for an institution that viewed her as disposable. And Cord had to learn an incredibly difficult lesson about love and control. He had to learn that loving someone means supporting their complex, sometimes messy choices, even when those choices trigger your own past traumas. You cannot force someone to heal on your timeline, and trying to control them to keep yourself safe is just another form of toxicity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want you to reflect on your own lives and the systems you operate within. Think about the institutions or the passions you've dedicated massive portions of your life to. It could be a high-pressure corporate job, a rigorous academic track, a creative pursuit, or even a deeply ingrained family dynamic or community organization. How do you actively separate the pure joy of the work itself from the sometimes toxic environments or systemic pressures that house it? How do you protect your internal passion from being slowly eroded by the very place that employs you or demands your time?
It is a delicate, constantly shifting balance that requires immense self-awareness. And it brings us to a final lingering thought. It's something that the book subtly leaves open, refusing to wrap it up with a neat little bow. At the end of the novel, Allegra achieves her lifelong dream of becoming a principal dancer. She reaches the absolute pinnacle of her career. But the unsettling reality is that she does so under the continued leadership of David, a director she absolutely knows is manipulative, coercive, and toxic. It raises a fascinating, deeply uncomfortable question for all of us, regardless of our industry. If the only way to reach the pinnacle of your art form or the top of your specific corporate ladder is to actively participate in a broken, abusive system, can you ever truly change that system from the inside once you have power? Or, by staying, are you ultimately just surviving it? Something to mull over until our next deep dive.